I'm just going to be doing a quick tutorial on brushes. Really simple, but I had some requests from my YouTube subscribers, and I really like to take to heart what they ask, and I listen to all the comments, so here we go. I get a lot of questions. What brushes are you using? How are you using them? To be honest, I mostly use the one round brush. It's the best brush in my opinion. It's very versatile. It can do pretty much anything. Let's just bring up this menu. This is the right-click function on my stylus, or if you're using a mouse. There's the hardness slider, so you can set it to be nice and soft, like an airbrush, or nice and hard, like a pencil or a pen. I generally go with the harder, but if I'm doing some blending, I might use the softer version. Depends what I'm doing. Also, the master diameter, you can set to be as big or as little as need be. One neat function is the pen pressure, which is based on how hard you actually press your stylus against the screen. I'm using a Wacom Cintiq 21UX. It works on styluses. The Wacom 21UX is technically an interactive pen display. Tablets are like the Bamboo, which is sort of something where you're not looking at your hand, you're looking at the screen and extrapolating where the pen tip is on your screen. I prefer the interactive pen displays because wherever you put your stylus is where the cursor is going to be, and I like that a lot better because I like to look at my hand while I'm working. But anyway, so essentially what the pressure sensitivity does is the harder you press, the bigger your brush, the lighter you press, the thinner your brush becomes. And there's all types of neat things you can hook up to that. There's also pen tilt, which I don't really use, but for some brushes it's useful. I don't really like it. It's too many axes of control for me. But okay, so anyway, people say, hey, that's impossible. You can't possibly be using just this brush. That's true. I don't always use this brush, but I use it most of the time. So, for example, if I want to blend this out, I'll just sample it, and then I'll do like a 50% opacity brush. And here's a little tip. So up here is your opacity settings. What I do is I don't go up there and click. I usually just hit a number key, because what will happen is, so let's say I want 80% opacity, I'll just hit the number 8. It sets it to 80. If I want something more specific, like 25, I'll hit 2 and then 5 in quick succession. It says it's a 25, as you can see. The only thing to be careful about is if you say, I want a 40% brush. Oh no, I want 60%. And if you do it too quickly, you'll get a 46% brush. So just make sure you pace yourself. Also, make sure you have the brush tool open. I do this all the time. So for example, brush is open, press 7, I get 70%. Brush is not open, I press 7, my selected layer becomes 70%. So be careful, because I do that all the time when I'm blending. I'll accidentally do it, and all of a sudden my blend becomes 20% when I meant for my brush to become 20%, and you don't want that. Alright, so anyway, back to what I was saying. So this is how I do blends. So I'll take like a sample of that color, and I'll put it like 50% opacity or less. And pretty much I just do these several layers, and each time I do a layer, I just make it thinner and less opaque. And as you can see, it will make a blend. Does it blend? Yes, it blends. And that's really all I do, just usually a much smaller area. And that works for me. But yeah, I use the round brush. I'm not doing any tricks, and I generally don't like using the soft brush. I use it very rarely. I mostly use it for like lighting effects, just because I don't know. I think it has a place and a use, and that place is elsewhere, and that use is not often. But anyway, so that's how I do blends. Believe it or not, that's the secret. Now, as far as there are lots of brushes, as you can see. Some of these are my creations, like the ones down here. A lot of them are not. A lot of them came with Photoshop, or I've hijacked from different sites. And I don't really mean hijacked. I always make sure I use it with the proper bounds. So a lot of these you'll see are darkened. He has a great collection of brushes. I believe they're still on his site. They might not be, but he'll be the first person to say it, that custom brushes can be very gimmicky, as in they only have one real use, and I'm inclined to agree. I really don't like using custom brushes unless I'm using them explicitly for one thing. So, for example, Darken has this great chain brush. Now, I don't really use it that often. I don't paint chains that often, but when I do, I'll use it like quickly, and then I'll probably like highlight it and shade it. But like I said, custom brushes have a time and place, and they really can't be overused because it becomes really obvious. The most overused brushes, in my opinion, are this guy. I mean, everyone has seen this stupid brush before. And this brush, the grass brush. I hate this brush so much. So, one thing to be careful about is if you want to be taken seriously as an artist, don't use custom brushes like that. Or if you do, make it difficult to tell that you're using them. That's the important part. Ultimately, a painting, all that really matters is the final image. People don't really care how you get there as much, as long as you're not stealing somebody else's work or something. But you can do whatever you want to get there, but just don't make it obvious how you got there. That's what I'm kind of saying. And it has nothing to do about the mystique. It's just this looks like crap. I mean, seriously. So anyway, there are some brushes which I will use occasionally, like this one, for example. But I don't use it the way you think I use it. So there are people who will say, I need to make a forest. Done. No, that's the improper way to use this brush. The way I use this brush is I'll do one, maybe, and I'll use that as reference. So I'll come in, and then I'll say, okay, well, this is great for reference of a tree, but I can't have them all looking like this. So what I'll do is I'll just go in and I'll paint my own. I'll paint my own branches in, and I'll take out some branches so that there's a little bit of variation. So it's a great start for a tree, but it shouldn't be the determining, the final form. I don't think that's the right way to use it. I think it's great if you modify it. You take out whole branches if you need to, like so. Not today, tree. Not this branch. See what I mean? Like, you can use it as a starting point, but don't use it as the ultimate effect. Now, I don't really use the smudge tool very often. People like to use it. I'm not a huge fan. It does have its uses, but I don't really like it that much. I mean, first off, it takes a while to render out, and I hate that. But I just don't really use it. I prefer to blur things myself, using just repeated brush strokes. I mean, sometimes it's useful if like there's a large area that you need to depixelate or whatever really quickly, but generally you should try to avoid it. What else about brushes? Oh, some fun tricks with brushes. So if you need to make a straight line, like a horizontal straight line, press your brush down, hold shift, and then go right and left. That's how you get a straight line. Same thing works vertically. Also, you can do point A, hold down shift, and point B, and it will draw a straight line. So that's actually pretty crazy useful. I use it mostly for when I'm determining perspective, but it has a use if you're doing like a sphere or something in a painting. What else? So all right, some caveats. So we're gonna go in here. Now, there are a lot of settings you can mess with on brushes. If you hit F5, you bring up this menu, which is the brush menu. Be careful in here. There's a lot of stuff going on. So let me explain what some of this stuff does. So this is the basic stuff: brush tip, shape. Diameter is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's how wide the brush is, ultimately. Angle is not going to show up well here, but actually, let's bring up a different brush. I'll use this guy. Okay, so this is my square brush. So angle, as you can see, actually just space it out a little bit. Okay, so angle. Angle is pretty much just, it will rotate all your brushes a certain number of degrees. Cool, but it has its uses. So that's what that does. Flip X and flip Y. Alright, let's do it like this. So flip X. Okay, it's not gonna work. Let's try this guy. Okay, so flip X pretty much does exactly what you think it's gonna do. It flips things sideways. Flip Y flips the head to tail, or along the Y axis. And spacing, I've been using kind of already. It just determines how close your, I'm going to call them points are on your stroke. Stroke is like you put your stylus down, you move it, you take it off. That's a stroke. Points are the number of actual brushes showing up on the stroke. So the greater your spacing, the fewer the points will be on your stroke. The smaller spacing, it'll be sort of just a smooth line. And then roundness is sort of a weird one. So as you can see from this kind of 3D plane, roundness determines its spatial 3D relationship, how tilted forward or back it is interpreted to be. And it can get interesting when you use the angle as well, but we're going to leave those like that. Whoa, buddy. 100%. Okay. Shape dynamics. So shape dynamics are important. A lot of them are very similar. So they just use things like jitter. So what jitter is, in the case of size jitter, is if you have 0 size jitter, it means that your brush will be, as determined by the brush tip shape, it will be exactly that every single time. If you bring your size jitter up to 100%, it means that your brush size, as you can see from this box down here, will vary greatly up to 100% of its actual value. So it can be anywhere from teeny tiny to normal sized, which is very useful. So I made this before this tutorial. This is a scatter brush, another shrapnel brush. So you want big size jitter when you want randomness. It adds randomness essentially. And pen pressure control is just what I was talking about. The harder you press, the more size jitter there is, or the larger it is. The weaker you press, the less. Minimum diameter. So what minimum diameter is sort of like a safety. What it does is it essentially will say the smallest that the brush can be within the size jitter is enter a value. So for 0, you can have almost a non-existent brush. As you see here, there's no brush here because it's a 0. If I bring that up, you'll see that they become more uniform based on the minimum diameter. At 100%, they're all going to be exactly the same size. At 50%, there's going to be some variation, and at 0%, there's going to be a lot of variation, which is what I want in this case. Angle jitter is just like the brush tip shape angle, except it's random. So at 0, there's no angle change, and at 100, there's a lot. It goes nuts. Spinners, as you can see, spinner doos. You can set controls. I don't like to control that. You can do it just using fade, pen pressure, whatever. Fade is pretty much your initial stroke is very strong, and then it fades off. Pen pressure is however hard you press. Pen tilt is the angle you hold your stylus at. That's a weird one. I don't like it. Stylus wheel, I don't know how to use because I don't know. Rotation, initial direction, and direction. Direction is kind of cool. Direction is whichever way the brush is going. I don't know how that would work for. I guess for angle it makes sense though, but it sort of will like turn based on how you're moving your brush at that time, versus initial direction is whichever way you were originally moving it at. And strangely, they don't want to. What's going on here? Oh, herp the derp. I'm using the eraser. Okay, so let's select something. We'll use. Oh, perfect example. So I have this brush, which is like a kind of like a triangle. Now, if I do shape dynamics, right, and I do angle based on direction, it will follow whichever direction my stylus is going. If I do initial direction, it will only go in that direction that it was originally going in. So as you can see, it's still always facing the same way. Yeah, I'm not going to mess with the other ones because I already explained those. And then there's flip X and flip Y. Flip X is just like good for brush tip shape. It will randomly flip it one way during the X plane, and flip Y will do it in the Y plane. So that's what those do. Scattering. I mean, this is kind of self-explanatory. The more scatter, the further apart it will come. The less scatter, the closer it will be. Count. You can figure it out based on the box. Pretty much the lower the count, the fewer the points per stroke will be. The higher the count, the more points per stroke there will be. Count jitter, you can figure that out too. Pretty much, it randomizes the count, essentially. That's all it is. And you can set a control for that too. So you can have really crazy brushes if you want. Texture. This is an interesting one. The way texture works, I don't really know how to explain this exactly, but how do I really? So what texture does is it will take this predetermined texture, and you can make your own. It's just like brushes. These are some patterns I defined earlier. These are the ones over here, but you can import pictures into this. And what it does is it sort of like applies a texture to your brush stroke. It's useful. It can be useful, but I don't really use it very often. Dual brush is crazy sauce. I don't really even know how to start explaining this. It pretty much takes two brushes and combines them based on the mode you choose. So you get like something crazy like this. See what I'm saying? I find it's really hard to use. It's too crazy for me. Um, Color dynamics. I almost never use these. So color dynamics. There's oh my god, there's so many things to cover here. So foreground background jitter. This is pretty much it's how much variation there is between the initial color, which is the foreground color, and the background color, which is in this case green. So if you have a foreground background jitter of 100%, it means 50% of the time your paintbrush will be using green, and 50% of the time it'll be using red, like so. If I do it at 50% or so, I mean, it's a rough approximation, it'll do 25% green and 75% red. See what I'm saying? Uh, I don't find this terribly useful because it always has this weird ring look to it, and it just doesn't look right in paintings for me, but I'm sure there are uses for it. Hue jitter. So, I don't know if you've ever seen the hue slider, but if I bring this up. So this is hue. These are all the different hues you can have. This is saturation, and this is brightness, darkness. Um, all these jitters here really just sort of mess around this grid. So if you have a high hue jitter, it can be really any color. It can be any color on the slider, but it will have the same saturation and the same brightness. If I bring up the saturation jitter, it will move things along this line. So from highly saturated over here to desaturated over here. And as you can see, it becomes less saturated. And then lastly, there's the brightness. So brightness moves things along this dimension, this plane. So this is extremely bright, and this is extremely dark. And as you can see here, it doesn't look very nice, but you can do it if you want. If you want to add variety to your brush, I don't really use it. Purity is sort of strange. I'm not really sure how to define purity. It seems to be mostly just a saturation thing. So if you have very low purity, you don't really have any saturation, and if you do, then you're highly saturated. I don't really know exactly what it does, but I never use it, so I don't really care. And then there are other dynamics. Opacity jitter does what you think it does. If you have a high opacity jitter, it will go between your set opacity and zero, pretty much. So if I set my opacity down to like 50%, it's not going to be very opaque, and the jitter will bring it all the way down to 0% and back anywhere in that range randomly. Flow is similar to opacity, but not quite the same. I'm not really sure how to describe this, but it's supposed to represent the flow of like an airbrush if you were using a traditional media. But I don't like to use flow. Opacity is enough for me. I don't need to mess with two pseudo opacity settings. Noise adds sort of like speckles. Wet edge is sort of it simulates like a water brush. Sorry, watercolors. You press down your brush and the edges are actually are darker as you can see than the rest of the stroke. Um, it's kind of cool. I don't really use it. Airbrush simulates an airbrush. Smoothing. I mean, smoothing is nice if you have a harder brush. It smooths out the edges. And protect texture. I never use that. I don't even know what it's for. I think it's if you have a textured brush or something. Anyway, so like I said, I don't really use this stuff. I think it's kind of gimmicky. I don't have a use for it. You might have a use for it, but I don't have a use for it. The runs I really use are shape dynamics and scattering, and that's really it. Those are the ones I really need. Most of the time I just use the round brush anyway, so they're not really necessary. Okay, so I hope that helps explain how to use brushes. I also have a couple of quick tricks. So for one, if you want to do a straight line, You can click, hold, shift, and drag. It works vertically too. You can also do it like that if you just click once, press shift, hold shift, and click somewhere else. Have fun with it. You can go nuts. I think I'll do another tutorial on how to make custom brushes because this one's already around 20 minutes or so. But thanks for watching. If you have any questions, if this has been useful, I don't know if it was useful to you. I hope it was. If it wasn't, say you suck, and I'll say sorry. I won't do that kind of tutorial anymore. But if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. I really do try to pay attention to the comments. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.